Hello again. Today is the next installment of Pick the Next Book I Read. This is roughly a weekly show where I give you 4 books to choose from and you pick one of the 4 books that I'm going to read. Last week I had 4 books to choose from and I actually picked a book that I was going to read for that week, which was Catwoman, Soul Stealer. So before I get to the actual books that you voted on last week, let me talk about this book that I read last week, which was Catwoman, Soul Stealer, the 3rd book in the DC Icon series. And I honestly got to tell you, I think this is one of my favorites of this series so far. Like I said, Sarah J. Maas has been a writer that sometimes I think goes a little too far in her writing, but when she's restrained and when she doesn't just pretty much turn it into YA erotica, she actually can write a halfway interesting story. And this book is pretty well written. I don't really feel like it is as YA as the other books before it. Batman and Wonder Woman definitely took place where Batman and Wonder Woman were both pretty much teenagers. This Catwoman story kind of deals with her very early in her career as Catwoman, basically her first kind of adventure as Catwoman. It does have some history. It obviously plays with the mythos of Catwoman. Gives her a history where she was with Carmine Falcone, and she was basically in a fight club type of scenario. Also with this group called the Leopards, where they, how she learned how to be a thief. She gets recruited into the League of Assassins, which is definitely something that I don't ever remember Catwoman having in her backstory, which could be a little problematic if you're a stickler for the comic book character of Catwoman, because Catwoman really wasn't somebody who would kill, though she does show remorse in this. I believe there was 2 killings in this. I really did enjoy this book. I thought it was a very well written book. And had a lot of different characters in it. Had Catwoman, had Poison Ivy, had Harley, had Joker, had Batwing, which I thought was actually very well written, actually. Batwing. I haven't seen Batwing in a book ever, I don't believe. And Harley I didn't think was written too well. Honestly, that was probably another weakness of this book. But otherwise, it was really well done. I really did enjoy this book and would highly recommend anybody who's a fan of the character of Catwoman or just comic book characters in general, especially the villains, to read this book. I thought this was one of the best of the DC Icon series, and I did not expect that from this book. So I was pleasantly surprised. So that is Catwoman, Soul Stealer. Now that the review is out of the way, let's recap what books last week you guys voted on. So it was Slayer, which is a Buffy the Vampire Universe story. Wondersmith, the 2nd novel in the Nevermore series, the Morgan Crow series. This is Calling of Morgan Crow. December Park by Ronald Malfi, which is a horror story. And this psychological thriller, which is Karen Slaughter's Pieces of Her. So, as the voting went, let me pull out my trusty notes. As the voting went, poor Karen Slaughter got slaughtered. Not one person voted for this book. I think a couple of people voted for something else and said, oh, this is kind of interesting too. But nobody voted for poor Karen Slaughter. So this book will not be read, at least in this round. Wondersmith got one vote. I forgot who voted for Wondersmith, but I appreciate the vote. I'm sure this book appreciates your one vote for this book. Again, it was kind of like a second choice for a couple of people, but in general, for an actual vote, Wondersmith got only 1 vote. So the real battle was between Slayer and December Park. Those were basically the two books that got the most votes, which I thought was kind of interesting. It kind of represents my channel pretty good, I think, because, my channel is a horror channel and reads a lot of YA as well. So I thought it was kind of a nice dichotomy here of like who was getting closer to winning. But Slayer definitely eked it out. Slayer has 13 votes at the end of this that I've just read, and December Park has 8 votes. So December Park is in second place and Slayer is in first. Which means I would be reading Slayer and reviewing it for next week. But I'm also going to read December Park. I actually started listening to this on audio and I'm reading this right now. So expect a double dose next week of December Park and Slayer for those who voted for both of those. And I will put Wonder Smith and Slaughter back in the rotation for one day picking them up again to actually vote on them. And that is those books. So, now that you know the winners of last week's vote, what books are we voting on this week? These are the books that I picked up to decide to vote on for next week's book to read. So let's get into them. First one would be, again, another psychological thriller, which is Behind Her Eyes. I've heard a lot about this book. I've never actually read it. It says, Louise, a single mom and secretary, is deeply embarrassed when she discovers that the man who sweet-talked and kissed her in the bar on a rare night out is her new boss, David. And Adele, new to town and lonely, who invited Louise for coffee after they bumped into each other on the street. Adele is David's wife. From the outside, David and Adele look like a picture-perfect husband and wife. But then why is David so controlling? And why is Adele so scared? As Louise is drawn further into David and Adele's orbit, she uncovers more puzzling questions. The only thing that is crystal clear is that something in this marriage is very, very wrong. But Louise can't guess how long or how far a person might go to protect their marriage's secret. So that is Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. That's the first book to choose from. Second book is a sci-fi book. Haven't read any real sci-fi in a while. So this is Collapsing Empire by John Scalzi. I've heard mixed reviews about this book, but I decided to pick it up. It is riding the flow, an extra-dimensional field available at certain points in space and time. Humanity spreads to innumerable planets throughout the universe. A new empire arises, the interdependency maintaining its control based on the doctrine that no one human outpost can survive without the other. But just as a river changes course, the flow changes as well. In rare cases, entire worlds have been cut off from the rest of humanity. When it's discovered that the entire flow is moving, possibly separating all human worlds from one another forever, 3 individuals, a scientist, a starship captain, and an emperor of the interdependency, must race against time to discover what can be salvaged from an interstellar empire on the brink of collapse. In equal parts, irreverent and perceptive, The Collapsing Empire is a robust adventure brimming with unforgettable characters, imperial politics, and an impending interstellar crisis. So that is John Scalzi's Collapsing Empire. For my horror selection for the week, I am going to grab a Bentley Little book, an older Bentley Little book called The Return. Look at that cover. That cover's kind of cool. This says, Springville is famous for its legend of the Mongolian monster. Of course, nobody really believes it. It's just a good campfire story, something to attract gullible tourists, until an excavating team unearths the figure of a screaming woman, the jawbone of a deformed animal, and a child's toy. How odd that they were buried together. Odd, too, is the foul odor lingering in the air, the strange noise at night, and the man's face found hanging from a tree. Now the locals are locking their doors because after sundown, campfire stories can seem very, very real. This is Bentley Little's The Return that I am looking forward to reading if you're interested in choosing that book. And for the YA book, I picked one that looks beautiful here. This cover, if you can actually see it. Shadow of the Fox, it is called. It's actually from Harlequin Teen, so I'm guessing a little bit of romance in here, but the story actually sounds really good. So let me read the story. 1,000 years ago, the great Kami dragon was summoned to grant a single terrible wish, and the land of Iwagoto was plunged into an age of darkness and chaos. Now, for whoever holds the scroll of 1,000 prayers, a new wish will be granted. A new age is about to dawn. Raised by monks in the isolated Silent Winds Temple, Yumeko has trained all her life to hide her yokai nature. Half kitsu, half human, her skills with illusion is matched only by her penchant for mischief. Until the day her home is burned to the ground, her adoptive family is brutally slain, and she is forced to flee from her life with the temple's greatest treasure, one part of the ancient scroll. There are many who would claim the dragon's wish for their own. Kage Tatsumi is a mysterious samurai of the Shadow Clan, is one such hunter. Under orders to retrieve the scroll at any cost, fate brings Kage and Yumeko together. With a promise to lead him to the scroll, an uneasy alliance is formed, offering Yumeko her best hope for survival. But he seeks what she has hidden away, and her deception could ultimately tear them both apart. With an army of demons at her heels, and the unlikeliest of allies at her side, Yumeko's secrets are more than a matter of life or death. They are the keys to the fate of the world itself. So again, it sounds really interesting to me. It's one of the reasons I actually picked it up. So it is called Shadow of the Fox. So again, for next week, the 4 choices are The Thriller Behind Her Eyes, the YA fantasy story called Shadow of the Fox, the Bentley Little horror story called The Return, and a sci-fi story from John Scalzi called The Collapsing Empire. So, get down in the comments and pick which book you're interested in me reading, and I will tabulate the vote, and I will tell you the result again next week. And remember, also next week, I will be reading both December Park and Slayer as well. So I will be reviewing both of those books next week. And as always, thanks again for watching. Thank you all for the warm support in my return to this channel. And I will see you soon. Bye.